Hello, thanks for hanging in with me, guys. Good to see you guys back. Today so the syllabus is slightly off right now. We're going to do one more lecture this week, and then we'll have two lectures next week that will get us back on track. It's been a confusing start, but we're starting to get the hang of it. Today we're going to talk about American citizens and political culture, a little bit about immigration. So we grow up in this country hearing about America as a melting pot of cultures, right? Cultures and ethnicities, but also that your identity needs to be preserved or honored or it will be lost. It's important to understand where American citizens have come from, what they bring with them, what their lives look like, how they spend their time and their money, what they believe, how they act on their beliefs. This is important in deciding who to fight for politically. We use statistics for this. There's a large older population in America demanding money for pensions and for nursing homes, which is competing with young families demanding better schools and health care for kids, with college students who want cheaper education, better loans, have longer investments in the United States. How can a single government represent all of this? Who is an American? There are things called native-born citizens and naturalized citizens. Citizenship is more than the way a government should be able to treat a resident. It's a legal status. Should you be able to lose your citizenship? Americans are usually born, not made. If you're born here, you're an American, even if your parents are not. This is called jus soli, or the right of the soil. Likewise, according to jus sanguinis, the right of the blood, even if you're born outside of the United States, but you're born to American citizens, you are an American citizen. You can also be a dual citizen. You can be a dual citizen if your parents hold citizenship in another country. Requirements for citizenship as they affect people born outside the United States do frequently change over time. Immigrants are citizens or subjects of one country who move to another country to work or live. And then naturalization is the legal process of acquiring citizenship for someone who has not acquired it by birth. Though most Americans are immigrants or have descended from immigrants, they ironically want strict limits on who else can come behind them. Non-immigrants are people who sometimes arrive seeking asylum. They're political refugees. Asylum is protection or sanctuary, especially from political persecution. Refugees are individuals who flee an area or country because of persecution on the basis of race, nationality, religion, group membership, or political opinion. Who can be considered a refugee is a very much a political decision and can sometimes raise some security concerns. And then you have something called a legal permanent residence. They have rights and responsibilities here, just like if we're visiting another country. Legal protections, due process of law, but they can't be discriminated against. But their rights are limited, and they can't vote or decide to live here permanently without permission. I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time during many debates on immigration reform. It's been an issue that's been going on for a long, long time, and it'll probably be going on for quite some time more. Immigration law is generally made by Congress with the approval of the president. And so it was something I worked for the House Judiciary Committee, which is where this falls. And it was really fascinating to watch under a number of different presidents, seeing how they approached this type of law. After 9/11, there were security concerns that were coming about regarding who may enter our country. They moved this out of the Department of Justice and created USCIS under the new Department of Homeland Security, trying to think about how to handle immigrants after that point. Who do we want to admit? No country can absorb everyone who wants a better and safer life. Who can be admitted is a political decision. You think about nativism, the belief that the needs of citizens ought to be met before those of immigrants. This really took on a political force with Trump when he ran in 2016. Jobs are the sort of scarce resource over which political battles are fought. If times are good and unemployment is low, newcomers who may want to do jobs we don't want are often welcomed. But if the economy is in trouble, jobless Americans become bitter about immigration. Immigrants are typically large consumers of social services, community resources, though they usually do pay taxes and serve through labor. Some areas are more burdened by social services to immigrants than others, and the issue becomes sensitive there. Being part of the majority is a source of political power, and people will fight for it. We usually want people who will do the jobs we don't want to do or can't do. Typically now, immigrants do a lot of agricultural work because Americans don't want to do this work for these low wages, but we also don't want them to be a burden on social services. A lot of border areas have problems with unregulated immigration. Communities can become swamped with often poor and unskilled residents. Kids need to be in school, so they're often entitled to social services, which creates financial burdens. Many work off the books, which means they don't contribute to the tax base. Tax money is generally federal and distributed around the census count, which means immigrants are typically not counted in, making their communities underfunded. However, there's also a lot of undocumented immigrants who do pay taxes, obey laws. Many children who are citizens are well integrated into their communities. They're hard to find and it's hard to find and to repatriate them, which is honestly, is that even the best solution? When Obama was president, he took executive action after Congress failed to pass a DREAM Act, which would have allowed for alien minors to earn legal residency through higher education or military service. He sent this back to a lower court where it remains. Some states act on their own. In 2010, Arizona made it a crime for immigrants to fail to carry documentation on them. This could lead to racial profiling. They struck this down in 2012 by the Supreme Court and said that states can verify the status of who they can stop, but it can't infringe on federal rights to set immigration policy. Your book has a little section on someone who says, I hope young people in this country don't take citizenship for granted because freedom was paid for. He said, this country has always been an experiment and still is. How do we define American? How do we define the Republic? How do we keep the Republic? Laws, papers. This was a section by, he said, his name is Jose Antonio Vargas. So I just thought that was such an interesting thing to think about. How do we keep the Republic? How do we define American? Those are really interesting things to think about. Let's think about the ideas that unite us. We have a common culture based on shared values. Making a single nation out of such diverse people is hard, but we all share some fundamental attitudes about how the world works and how it should work. The political culture, the broad pattern of ideas and beliefs and values that a population holds about its citizens and governments. When we say Americans think, we mean most Americans hold these views. And then we have, like I mentioned in last class, procedural guarantees in this country, the government assurance that the rules are going to work smoothly. We're going to treat everyone fairly. There's not a promise of a particular outcome, but there's a promise of how the rules will work. We think a government should guarantee a fair process, a free market to distribute goods, a majority rule to make decisions, due process to determine guilt and innocence. In somewhere like Sweden, for example, they believe that a government should actively seek to realize the values of equality, to guarantee a certain quality of life, to increase equality of income, and they say that the government can be evaluated by how well it produces those substantive outcomes, not just by how well it guarantees a fair process. Americans are more comfortable ensuring that things are done in a fair and proper way and trusting that the outcomes will be good because the rules are fair. We're still involved in social programs and welfare like Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. It aims more on teaching a man to fish or getting folks on their feet so they can participate in the market rather than cleaning up slums or eliminating poverty. Individualism is the belief that what's good for society, what is good for society is based on what is good for individuals, and that individuals are responsible for their own welfare. Contrast this with a collectivist point of view, which gives government or society some responsibility for individual welfare, and it holds that what is good for society may not be the same as what is good in the interest of individuals. Americans don't love paying taxes, though we often love giving privately. Collective interest is usually invoked in time of war or national crisis. And somewhere like Sweden, they're usually more collective and have more substantive social policies because they have a sense of themselves as a collective whole. To help one is to help all. They value solidarity, group identification, and unity that allows them to entertain policies that we wouldn't consider. Like Sweden once used pension funds to help equalize the wages of workers. Americans would say this violates their sense of individualism. America is not wholly procedural and not wholly individualistic, but the differences there are usually partisan and more prominent in the United States than in other nations. In the United States and other Scandinavian countries, all capitalist democracies agree that individuals should make most decisions about their own life, but Scandinavian countries have a greater tolerance for some substantive economic policy than does the procedural United States. Americans, we put a high value on freedom, right? I mean, think about what you hear at 4th of July. We're defining this as freedom for the individual from restraint by the state. This is procedural. No unfair restriction should be put in the way of pursuing what you want, but this doesn't also guarantee you help in achieving those things. The Bill of Rights. This is the proof of America's commitment to procedural freedom, which guarantees our basic civil liberties. We're going to dig into the Bill of Rights a little more later on, but I do want you guys to read your Constitution after this today. Think about equality. This is a value that we cast more clearly in procedural versus substantive terms. We guarantee equality of treatment, access, and opportunity, not of results. We have equal access to run the race, but not everyone can finish in the same place, and honestly, not everyone even starts from the same place. What about some ideas that divide us in this country? We have different ideologies, sets of beliefs about politics and society that help people make sense of their world. These are based on normative prescriptions. It might seem clear to one person, but another person thinks that person's wrong. So we debate and we argue and we become very passionate and polarized, especially lately. But because we share a political culture, the United States range of debate is relatively narrow. We have no successful communist or socialist parties here. Conservatives are people who generally favor limited government and are cautious about change. This is usually considered the Republican Party. They tend to promote social values, distrust of government action except in matters of national security. They're resistant to change. They're trying to maintain a prescribed social order. And then you have liberals. These are people who generally favor government action and view change as progress. That's usually the Democratic Party. They tell a narrative based on potential for progress and change, trust in government, innovations as answers to social problems, and an expansion of individual rights and expression. Right now, we have a Democrat president, we have a Democratic-led Senate, and we have a Democratic-led House of Representatives right now. Of course, that can change in a little over a year. It likely will. It tends to flip a lot. It's flipped a number of times while I've been working in Congress. Economic dimension. So thinking of this in the form of like the Great Depression in the 30s and FDR's New Deal policies, this really set apart Republicans and Democrats on how much they can trust the government to regulate a market that showed it could not regulate itself. Conservatives think a government shouldn't have too much power and that it's not a competent economic actor. Liberals trust the government to regulate the economy, saying that unregulation causes poverty. In the social order part of this, in the 80s and 90s, people were meeting basic economic needs, and many people were identified as middle class. They began to focus on morality and the quality of life. How much should the government be involved in protecting individual rights and the procedural guarantees of equality and due process? Or should the government be making more substantive judgments about how people live their lives? Conservatives emphasize religion, reject abortion, promote traditional family values, emphasize more of the American way. People should know their place in society, censor alternative versions of social orders. And then liberals tend to want to preserve the environments, create a sense of community based on equality, promote individual safety. And then you have what's called an economic liberal. This is someone who favors an expanded government and role in the economy, but a limited role in the social order. And then you have an economic conservative, someone who favors a strictly procedural role, government role in the economy and the social order. They don't want the government to interfere in their lives, but they also shouldn't interfere in the economy. Government can regulate the market and eliminate unfair trade practices, provide some public goods, but there should be open immigration policies because immigrant labor is cheap and it keeps the market competitive. Then you have libertarians. These are people who favor a minimal government role in any sphere. And you have social liberals who favor a greater control of the economy and the social order to bring about greater equality and to regulate the effects of progress. Communitarians are those who favor a strong substantive government role in the economy and the social order so that their version of a community of equals may be realized. And then social conservatives, those who endorse limited government control of the economy but considerable government intervention to realize a traditional social order based on religious values and hierarchy rather than equality. Who fits where? Most of us fit somewhere between all these boxes. It's hard to fit solely in one box. The Tea Party movement, named for the Boston Tea Party Rebellion against taxation in 1773, had a very pro-American agenda. Anti-corporation, anti-government, except for Social Security and Medicare, because most Tea Partiers are older. They were more conservative than a lot of Republicans, but they shook up the party in 2010. They challenged those in office who didn't share their ideology, and it culminated in a rejection of the party establishment in 2016 when Trump was elected. Establishment candidates such as Jeb Bush and Ted Cruz both failed because they brought about an unconventional candidate like Trump. But the Speaker of the House at the time, Paul Ryan, and Leader Mitch McConnell in the Senate, they were dismayed. They didn't like his personality. They were confused about what was happening to the Republican Party at the time. I was working in D.C. at that time, and it was a really confusing time to be working in Republican politics. Most establishment leadership was really confused about what was going on, but then eventually fell in line and ended up voting for him. Social scientists are still trying to figure out the 2016 election. They probably will be for a while. They believe that when proper order and power hierarchy is threatened, either physically or existentially, social conservatives can be attracted to an authoritarian narrative that seeks to secure the old order by excluding the perceived danger. There are fewer splits in the current Democratic Party. There are some, you have folks like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders who have more extreme views on things, but those splits are a little more minor than the splits in the Republican Party right now. Some of the some of the core values of Americans, democracy. It unites those that are born here and those who are new immigrants. We are united in our belief that we are a strong democracy. We were democratic more than 200 years ago. Women, African Americans, and 18-year-olds can vote. They didn't originally, but voter turnout is low, and most Americans are apathetic toward politics. Even in 2008, when we had a really high voter turnout, when Obama was elected president, only 60% of people voted. Do you think people think they're being heard in other group activities? Maybe like environmental groups they're part of, or church. You think people think their voices are being heard somewhere else, or do we have a true civic crisis? Why are people not voting? If we were doing our online assignments this week, which I'm giving you guys one more week to figure out how to get everybody on Blackboard, would be our assignment right now. I want you to think about how you define what an American is. How do you think that we should maintain the republic? Through laws, through paperwork? And what do you think the role of immigration is and the meaning of citizenship in the United States politics? So how do you define American? How do you maintain the republic? What is the role of immigration and the meaning of citizenship in the United States? All right, guys, I'm going to come back next week with 2 more lectures just because we somehow got a little bit off track. We will come back next week with politics of the American founding and federalism in the United States Constitution. So please keep up with your reading that I have posted. Read your Constitution today, and I will be back next week. Thanks.